Martin Luther King Jr. versus Malcolm X. Why one was loved and the other feared. What if I told you that America didn't just choose Martin Luther King Jr. over Malcolm X by chance, but because one man's dream was safer for the system while the other man's fire threatened to burn it all down? Why did America embrace King as a hero of peace while branding Malcolm as a dangerous radical? Was it because King preached love and nonviolence, urging the nation to live up to its ideals of freedom and equality, while Malcolm called for Black nationalism, self-determination, and independence from white power? This is the clash between two giants of the civil rights movement, and the truth is far more complex than what the history books often tell us. King's call for integration comforted America, while Malcolm's bold stance exposed its hypocrisy. One, the other as a threat. But what did this mean for Black liberation? And what lessons do we carry into today's struggles for justice, power, and true independence? Stay with me until the end, because the answer will challenge everything you thought you knew about America's civil rights history. And if you're ready to keep uncovering hidden truths and rewriting our story, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to My Blackness 100, the channel dedicated to promoting Black excellence and retelling the powerful stories of Africa and the diaspora. Together, let's reclaim the narrative. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. stand as two of the most iconic leaders of the civil rights movement, but their philosophies about achieving Black liberation were dramatically different. Malcolm X rooted his vision in Black nationalism, racial pride, and self-determination. He believed true freedom for Black people in America could never come from white society. It had to be built within the Black community. His childhood shaped this conviction. His father, a Garveyite preacher inspired by Marcus Garvey's call for African unity, was reportedly killed by white supremacists. His mother, broken by trauma, was institutionalized. Malcolm grew up in poverty and hostility, scarred by the violence of Jim Crow America. In school, when he expressed dreams of becoming a lawyer, a teacher told him it was impossible for a colored boy. His later years on the streets and in prison exposed him to systemic oppression that criminalized young Black men, integration, and strengthened his belief in independence. Prison was a turning point. Malcolm discovered the Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad. The NOI's teachings of separation, Black-owned businesses, and schools resonated with him. He became one of its most fiery ministers, preaching that assimilation into a racist society was not freedom, but dependence. Looking at police brutality, poverty, and racial violence, Malcolm concluded that only self-reliance could break the cycle of oppression. He also tied the African American struggle to global liberation movements. As African nations like Ghana and Algeria won independence from colonial powers, Malcolm saw clear parallels with Black America's fight against racism. His pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964 transformed him further. There, he saw Muslims of all races worshiping together, which shifted his outlook. He stopped condemning all white people and reframed the problem as systemic racism, not individual skin color. From then on, his fight expanded from Black rights to human rights, advocating for international solidarity against oppression. In contrast, built his philosophy on Christian love and Gandhian nonviolence. Raised in Atlanta in a deeply religious household, King absorbed values of dignity, faith, and discipline. Childhood experiences with segregation, like losing a white friend because of Jim Crow laws, scarred him but also ignited his belief that love, not hatred, was the way forward. His education shaped his worldview. At Morehouse, Crozer Seminary, and Boston University, King encountered the writings of Gandhi and Thoreau. Gandhi's principle of nonviolent resistance inspired him to apply similar strategies against segregation. King taught that resisting injustice without violence was not weakness, but spiritual power. Living in Jim Crow America, King saw the daily humiliations of segregation, separate buses, water fountains, and restricted voting rights. But unlike Malcolm, King didn't reject America entirely. Instead, he demanded that America live up to its founding ideals. He often quoted the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, using them as moral weapons against racism. Through movements like the Montgomery bus boycott and the March on Washington, King showed that peaceful protests could cripple segregation and inspire massive social change. Global politics gave King additional leverage. During the Cold War, America promoted itself as the leader of the free world. But images of peaceful black protesters being attacked by police dogs and fire hoses exposed U.S. hypocrisy to the globe. King used this to pressure Washington into passing landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Faith was central to his activism. King's vision of nonviolence was rooted in agape, unconditional love. His dream was an America where black and white children could walk hand in hand as equals, where justice flowed like waters. His Christian belief in forgiveness and reconciliation guided his call for equality. When it came to strategy, Malcolm X and King stood on opposite ends. Freedom must be won by any means necessary, encouraging self-defense and black communities to organize their own protection. King argued that violence would destroy the moral credibility of the movement. Nonviolence, he showed, could generate sympathy, shame the oppressor, and attract allies from across racial lines. Their views on white society also split them. Malcolm X initially called whites blue-eyed devils, while King constantly spoke of reconciliation. After Mecca, Malcolm revised his views, acknowledging that not all whites were oppressors. King, meanwhile, continued to insist that love could transform enemies into allies. Economically, Malcolm promoted black self-reliance, owning schools, shops, and banks as shields against exploitation. King pushed for integration but demanded fair wages and economic justice. His final campaign, the Poor People's Campaign, aimed to unite poor Americans of all races against poverty and inequality. Religion further divided their rhetoric. Malcolm drew from Islam, first through the Nation of Islam, later Sunni Islam after his Hajj, which broadened his worldview to global struggles. King, rooted in Christianity, quoted Jesus and the prophets in his sermons, urging America to live up to God's vision of justice. On integration, Malcolm argued it drained black strength and mocked it as begging to sit at a white lunch counter instead of owning the restaurant. King, however, believed integration was essential to dismantle second-class citizenship. Their relationship with government showed the same split. Malcolm dismissed the U.S. as irredeemably racist, taking his fight to the United Nations and framing it as a human rights issue. King appealed directly to America's conscience, quoting its founding documents and demanding reforms within the system. Malcolm was fiery, uncompromising, and provocative, designed to ignite black pride. King's speeches were poetic and hopeful, crafted to build interracial coalitions. Malcolm mostly spoke to black audiences, urging self-respect and independence. King reached across racial lines, addressing both black and white audiences to build unity. Globally, Malcolm connected Black America's struggle with anti-colonial movements in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. King, while initially U.S.-focused, later expanded his voice internationally, opposing the Vietnam War and linking racism, militarism, and poverty as interconnected global injustices. Mainstream America embraced King more than Malcolm. King's I Have a Dream vision of racial harmony felt safer to the white majority than Malcolm's militant demand for black power. But both men were essential. King was the moral appeal, forcing America to confront its conscience. Malcolm was the uncompromising voice of dignity and self-respect, warning that patience had limits. By the end of their lives, their visions began to converge. King grew more radical, denouncing economic exploitation and U.S. militarism, echoing Malcolm's critiques. Malcolm, after Mecca, expanded his vision beyond separation, moving closer to King's idea of universal solidarity. Together, they created a balance, King the dreamer within the system, Malcolm the firebrand outside it. Their differences made them powerful in different ways, but their shared mission was the same: freedom, dignity, and equality for Black people and oppressed people everywhere. America's preference for Martin Luther King Jr. over Malcolm X was rooted in how their philosophies aligned with mainstream society's comfort levels. King's vision of nonviolence, love, and integration resonated with the U.S. government and white moderates. His speeches framed the civil rights struggle as a moral issue, urging America to live up to its own founding ideals. This approach made his message easier to digest for those who feared radical change. By calling for unity and reconciliation, King appeared as a figure of healing rather than confrontation, which allowed the state and media to present him as the acceptable face of the movement. Malcolm X, by contrast, was deeply unsettling to America's power structures. He rejected integration, arguing it weakened Black communities and increased dependency on whites. Instead, he preached Black nationalism, self-determination, and control over economic and political institutions. His bold critiques of racism, capitalism, and U.S. imperialism challenged not only white supremacy, but also the very foundations of America's global power. Where King offered a vision of inclusion within the system, Malcolm demanded a new system that empowered Black people independently. This frightened policymakers, the press, and white liberals who painted him as militant and dangerous. In short, King's philosophy made America feel it could reform itself without dismantling its institutions, while Malcolm's ideas called for a redistribution of power and autonomy for Black people. One was seen as manageable, the other as threatening. That difference largely explains why King was embraced as a national hero, while Malcolm remained a polarizing figure during his life. And that wraps up our deep dive into why America embraced Martin Luther King Jr. more than Malcolm X. But here's the truth. Both men left lessons that shaped the fight for justice, their vision into the 21st century. If you found value in this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to My Blackness 100, the channel dedicated to promoting Black excellence, rewriting African and diaspora history, and uncovering the truths. Go watch my video, Black Wall Street 2.0, Rebuilding Black Wall Street. It's a must-see if you want to understand how economic power and community strength remain the real keys to Black liberation today.